questions. Questions orales. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, first of all, I'd like to congratulate the Prime Minister, the government, and all members of this House on their election. I'd also like to remind the Conservatives that 60% of Canadians voted against this government. But on the campaign trail, the Prime Minister said he was going to have to work with all members of the House. But in the throne speech, there's no change of tone. What happened to the government's willingness to work together?
Government House Leader. Monsieur le Président.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to congratulate the new opposition leader. He was very successful in the election, and we can see the results here in the throne speech. We repeated promises that we made during the election campaign. The results were clear, and we now have a majority Conservative government.
Mr. Speaker, in the election, Canadians clearly voted for change, and they clearly wanted members of Parliament to work together. I think that motion and sentiment was very strong. They wanted a focus on their families and the issues that were affecting them each and every day. Now, New Democrats have committed to work respectfully, to end heckling, and to give this place the decorum that it deserves. Will the government commit today to do the same?
The Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, we are, of course, looking forward to a mandate in which we can move forward constructively on the issues that we talked about to Canadians, and to have here in this House a debate which is meaningful, which is thoughtful, which is focused on policy, which is focused on the values of Canadians. I think we're going to have that in the years to come. I think it promises to be a very good, productive, constructive Parliament, and I know that with our clear mandate, having laid out exactly what we would do for Canadians, we certainly intend to carry through on those commitments and do exactly what we said we would do.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
I'm sure the official record will show the sentiment that was just expressed, Mr. Speaker. Nous avons eu un printemps.
Springtime in the Arab world this year has been extraordinary, unprecedented, and the steps toward democracy have been painful ones. The people of these countries need support. Last month, the G8 promised $20 billion, but nothing from Canada. The Conservatives don't seem to realize how important it is to help these people make the transition. Why has Canada isolated itself from its G8 allies? The Honourable Minister of Foreign Affairs.
My time in the House, thank the electors of Ottawa West Nepean, and congratulate my friend, the new Leader of the Opposition, on an impressive result at election time. And let me tell him, our government and I am committed to working with him on this and other important issues. I can correct the record, Mr. Speaker, and tell the Leader of the Opposition that over the past few years we've put more than $250 million of new funding to support efforts that will have a direct benefit to the people of Egypt, the people of Tunisia. Obviously, we're making an unprecedented commitment in Libya, and I look forward to working with the Leader of the Opposition and his team on this important issue.
The Honourable Member for Laurier Ste. Marie. Mr. Speaker, there have been recent reports of a number of human rights abuses in Libya, including rape. This is happening in Benghazi, Tobruk, Berga, Misrata, and in a number of other cities in Libya. Our top priority in Libya should be providing humanitarian assistance, particularly for women fleeing from the violence. Can the government commit to making this aid a priority? And will the government contribute to bringing Gaddafi regime war criminals to justice? The Honourable Foreign Affairs Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I I am equally as concerned as the member for Laurier St. Marie about the huge number of verified allegations with respect to sexual violence being used as a tool of war. I can report to the member opposite. I've had good discussions with her Foreign Affairs critic on this issue. This morning I had a specific briefing on what we might do in Canada to be able to tackle this issue, whether it's working with the International Criminal Court or providing tangible assistance either on the social services side or on the prosecution and policing side on this important issue. I'd be very pleased to work with the member opposite on something that really should be a uniting force among all of us in this House, something that is reprehensible.
The honourable member for Ottawa Centre.
Mr. Speaker, we've seen tremendous change in the Arab world, and Canadians support that change. And they want to see our government do a little bit more. As we heard, G8 countries pledged $20 billion for the Arab Spring. There was no new money from Canada. There was nothing for Tunisia and nothing for Egypt. They broke their 2008 throne speech promise to create a Democratic Development Institute. So, Mr. Speaker, the question is, why isn't Canada supporting these new democracies? And why is the government out of step with the rest of the world?
The honourable Minister of Foreign Affairs.
I can report, obviously, Canada remains incredibly supportive of the change that we've seen going on in both Tunisia and in Egypt. We have come forward with funds to support some initiatives with respect to young people in Egypt. When the Prime Minister attended the G8 in France, he was certainly underlined the support that we're giving both militarily and in humanitarian assistance to Libya. We are engaged. We're doing a lot of funding, more than $250,000 in recent years, to the multilateral bodies which will provide this direct support. We're obviously watching with great interest what's going on, and we'll continue to see what more can be done.
The honourable member for Toronto Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have a very simple question for the government. The government leader talked about the fact that he wanted to establish in the throne speech Canadian values. Is reduction of poverty in Canada, is that a priority for Canadians? Yes. Is it a priority for the government? Apparently not. Why not, Mr. Speaker? Why is poverty reduction not a priority for the Conservative government? The Honourable Government House Leader.
Congratulate the member from Toronto Centre for his new position as the leader of the Liberal Party. I know that after elections in which the NDP has scored surprising results, he's found himself in positions he didn't have before of power and influence, and we look forward to seeing him in that role in a constructive way in this House. As you know, this this government has been very much committed to improving the condition and well-being of ordinary Canadian families. That's why through our measures to reduce the tax burden, the typical Canadian family is now over $3,000 better off on average in terms of the amount of taxes they have to pay. And later today in the budget, we may hear some more things.
The honourable member for Toronto Centre.
The allergy to the word poverty still seems to be there, Mr. Speaker, but in light of the statements by the government with respect to its desire to improve the condition of Aboriginal people, I wonder if I could ask the Minister, in congratulating him on his appointment again, is to say that Chief Atleo, in his statements on the speech from the throne, made it very clear that he regarded a meeting between the Crown and the leadership of the First Nations, the Métis, and all the Aboriginal people, including the Inuit, that meeting had to take place on a government-to-government basis, on a basis that fully respects the jurisdictions of First Nations and Aboriginal people. I'd like to ask the Minister why that commitment...
Order. The Honourable Minister of Aboriginal Affairs.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. We are at a place where we're having discussions with the National Chief. We are looking at an action plan that we can work on together, and a part of that dialogue will be to discuss this very gathering that you are bringing up. So that's something that we will flesh out over the next period of time. Hopefully we'll come to something quite solid in the fall.
The Honourable Member for Barassa. Mr. Speaker, with all this kindness, there are people in the Montérégie who for 50 days have had water up to here. We're hearing all these nice things, but the Prime Minister has shown as much empathy as someone having a tooth pulled without anesthetic. Why is the Prime Minister not making more concessions and allowing the army to play a cleanup role. Jean Chrétien, when a problem happened under Bouchard, Chrétien asked, what do you need? What can we do to help? People should be there to help with the cleanup. What are you waiting for? The Honourable Minister of National Defence.
Mr. Speaker, of course, with the honourable member and all Canadians, we are very sympathetic to the plight of those affected by the floods, not only in Quebec, but in Manitoba, as well as those who are suffering in Saskatchewan. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister, as you know, has been in the region this morning. We have Canadian soldiers who have been on the ground within 24 hours after being contacted by the province of Quebec. They continue to work with the province to the best of their ability to help mitigate the damage. They are continuing their efforts as we speak. There are 500 soldiers there currently, Mr. Speaker, continuing in that effort, and we congratulate them on that incredible effort.
The Honourable Member for Saint-Jean. Mr. Speaker, the people of the Montérégie are facing the worst flooding the region has ever seen. After 50 days, the Prime Minister has finally shown up, and we're learning that unlike victims in Manitoba and Alberta, the residents of the Montérégie can still not count on accelerated processing of their EI claims. So, Mr. Speaker, my question is, why the double standard for residents of the Montérégie? The Honourable Minister of Human Resources. Mr. Speaker, our government understands the difficulties and the stress that victims are experiencing in the Montérégie area. That's why we have accelerated processing of their EI claims. Once I learned of the situation, I asked staff for details, and the details are now available on our website. The Honourable Member for Saint-Jean. Mr. Speaker, in our area, the whole area is flooded. There are people who have run out of steam, but the government has shown very little concern for accelerating help. They've done so for Manitoba and Alberta, but they're ignoring those in Quebec until today. They have been. Will the Minister of Human Resources explain why victims in the Montérégie still today have to wait for accelerated service? The Honourable Minister of Human Resources. Mr. Speaker, all across Canada, Canadians who fall victim to natural disasters have to get the same support from their government, regardless of where they live. That's why, as soon as I learned of the situation, I asked the department to ensure that victims of the flooding in the Montérégie would receive immediately the same priority treatment and processing for EI claims as elsewhere in Canada. And they will get that immediately, and details are available on our website. The Honourable Member for Vaudreuil-Soulanges. Mr. Speaker. Our communities, both rural and urban, need support to give their infrastructure a second wind. Think of the Champlain Bridge. The Minister of Transport says there will be a permanent program for infrastructure development, but it's time to act. Will this development be sustainable? Will public transit be included in this plan? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Transport. Mr. Speaker, our government has already invested an amount of money in infrastructure. Our record is exceptional in this area when it comes to transfers to cities and municipalities.
Unprecedented stimulus contributions we have announced in the March budget, which will be once again introduced today with improvements, that the gas tax fund will be made permanent, Mr. Speaker. That is an achievement of this government. We're proud of it, and we're going to move forward. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Trinity Spadina.
In the 90s, the federal deficit was downloaded onto the backs of Canadian communities. 20 years later, Canadians are stuck in traffic, our bridges are crumbling, our water systems are failing. Friday from speech ignored municipalities and infrastructure completely. Canadians deserve a vision, a national public transit strategy. Will this government act immediately with new funds to deal with the $123 billion infrastructure deficit?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary, the Minister of Transport.
I thank the honourable member for her question. She will recall that in 2007, we extended the gas tax fund by 4 years. In 2009, we doubled the gas tax fund. In 2010, despite economic challenges and despite efforts to keep costs down, we protected the gas tax fund. And in today's budget, she will have occasion to stand and join hands with our government as we move forward with an effort to make the gas tax fund permanent to help our communities right across this country. Thank you.
The honourable member for Acadie-Bathurst. Mr. Speaker.
And is mandated to provide postal service to all Canadians. Lately, Conservative has been wielding away economical, stable elements of Canada Post and move towards privatization. Mr. Speaker, doesn't the government realize no private alternative can deliver Canada Post mandate? And will the government use its influence to make sure management remembers that its mandate is to serve Canadians come first?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, our government is committed to quality postal service for all Canadians, no matter where they live. Last year, Canada Post began a $2.1 billion modernization initiative, which will make major investments in equipment, technology, and other processes. We're making Canada Post more effective for Canadians, the clients, the people that Canada Post serves, and I think Canadians will be very pleased with the results. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Acadie-Bathurst. Mr. Speaker, last year Canada Post made $281 million in profits and is still requesting concessions for its employees. This attitude is endangering services in rural regions and remote regions. No one in the private sector can fulfill the mandate of Canada Post, which is to offer postal services across Canada. Mr. Speaker, will the federal government use its influence to remind the administration of Canada Post that its main mandate is to serve all Canadians? The Honourable Minister of State.
Mr. Speaker, again, Canada Post is mandated to provide postal service to Canadians regardless of where they live. Canada Post has made substantial investments in the infrastructure of Canada Post, $2.1 billion, as I've already mentioned. We are working to ensure that Canadians receive the best possible postal service regardless of where they live. And I look forward to working with the opposition parties and all stakeholders to ensure that Canadians get the mail when they ask for it.
The Honourable Member for Vancouver East.
Mr. Speaker, the Health Council of Canada released its 2011 progress report, and the conclusions are very clear. This government failed to make progress because they failed to show leadership. Conservatives stalled altogether on a cost-saving national prescription drug program, failing Canadians who are now facing extraordinary drug costs. Will this government acknowledge their lack of progress and commit to working with New Democrats to protect Canada's healthcare system?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, and I look forward to working with my colleague for the next 4 years. Our government recognizes the importance of timely access to health care and is working to support the provinces and the territories in their efforts to address the issues of wait time. As an example, we have increased the transfers to the provinces by over 33% since we formed government, and we will continue so that the provinces and territories can continue to focus in areas of importance, and will work collaboratively with the provinces and territories to renew the health care accord and to continue to reduce wait times in the respective jurisdictions. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Vancouver East.
Well, Mr. Speaker, healthcare is far too important for just empty rhetoric, and Canadians are very tired of false promises. Leading into the 2014 healthcare negotiations, now is the time to bring in much-needed improvements. So, Mr. Speaker, will the government commit to holding open consultations with Canadians so that the next accord reflects their values and priorities for healthcare in this country?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as I said before, we're looking forward to working with the provinces and territories to renew the health accord and to continue to address the areas that wait time as an example, while respecting the fact that the health care is delivered by the provinces and jurisdictions. Our discussions will emphasize the importance of accountability and results for Canadians, including better reporting from the provinces and the territories to measure progress and guarantees covering additional medically necessary procedures. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Gatineau. Mr. Speaker, further to the throne speech last week, we heard that the government is preparing to dismantle the Committee on the Status of Women that has been working on legislative texts since 2004 that affect Canadian women of all horizons. Can the minister responsible for the status of women reassure this House and tell us that this committee will remain active throughout the 41st Parliament? Honourable Minister of the Status of Women.
As it is my first time getting up in the House in our 4-year majority mandate, I'd like to thank the constituents of Edmonton Spruce Grove for re-electing me. We are hard-working Canadians and we want to focus on job creation and balancing the budget. I'd also like to take the opportunity to congratulate my colleague and all the women who have been elected to Parliament in this last election, and I can assure my opposite that I look forward to working collaboratively with all women in the House, including those who sit on the Standing Committee on the Status of Women, to improve the lives of women all across this country.
The honourable member for Beauséjour.
The government announced the beginning of Canada's participation in the mission in Libya. It said it was an effort to protect civilians, and subsequently there's been some confusion about the mission's objectives. We're wondering if the Minister of Foreign Affairs could confirm that in fact the objectives of the mission remain unchanged, to protect civilians, and that in any subsequent extension of the mission, there will not be a change in the clear objectives of the mission, and, for example, the military footprint will not change, including a commitment not to put Canadian forces on the ground in Libya.
The Honourable Minister of Foreign Affairs.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I want to congratulate the member for Beauséjour on his re-election and his appointment as a Foreign Affairs critic. I look forward to working with him on advancing a principled Canadian foreign policy that expresses Canadian values right around the world, Mr. Speaker. I can tell this House and the member opposite that there is no change in the military mission. The military mission was approved by the United Nations through resolutions 1970 and 1973 is to protect the civilian population from attacks by Gaddafi's forces. I look forward to debating an extension of that mission with the member and all members of the House in short order.
Mr. Speaker, both France and Italy recognize the National Libyan Council as the legitimate government of the country. I would thus ask the Minister of Foreign Affairs if he can give us some details on the Government of Canada's position.
The Honourable Minister of Foreign Affairs.
Mr. Speaker, in Canada we recognize states, not particular governments. I can say this, is that we do look forward to working with the Council throughout the Canadian mission in Libya. It is has a very important role to play in the future of Libya. The G8 leaders in their summit in Deauville did say at a political level that Colonel Gaddafi must go. That is an important political objective, and I think that we can work closely with the Transitional Council on this important objective.
The Honourable Member for Scarborough-Guildwood.
Mr. Speaker, it's cost Canada some $300 million to close Camp Mirage in the UAE. We now learn that the Minister of Defence is planning to open a base in Kuwait some 400 miles further away from Afghanistan. Wow. Will the Minister tell Canadian taxpayers how much this reopening will cost, in addition to the already $300 million sunk and because of a turf war between the Minister of Defence and the Minister of Foreign Affairs.
The Honourable Minister of National Defence.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I want to take the opportunity to congratulate the new defence critic for the Liberal Party and assure him that relations between the Minister of Foreign Affairs and I are on good terms. I can also tell him, Mr. Speaker, that his figures are completely wrong. Those numbers are completely false. And what we have done, obviously, is made arrangements to have logistic hubs in parts of the Middle East that allow us to continue the logistic support for the ongoing mission in Afghanistan, Mr. Speaker. That is the intention of the Department, Mr. Speaker, nothing more than that.
The Honourable Member for St. John's East.
Throughout 2009 and most of 2010, the Prime Minister repeatedly told Canadians our military forces were leaving Afghanistan in 2011 in accordance with the resolution of this House. When the Minister of Defence mused about extending the mission, he was quickly corrected by the Prime Minister's office. But in reality, Mr. Speaker, as early as March 2009, this government had put all options back on the table, despite what the Prime Minister was telling Parliament at the same time. Why did the Prime Minister not tell Canadians the truth about his plans for Afghanistan?
I'm pleased to tell this House the Prime Minister has always told the truth on this issue. I believe the member for St. John's East is talking about leaks from that are not of a Canadian origin, and the government has a policy not to comment on such leaks.
The Honourable Member for St. John's East.
Mr. Speaker, Canadians are right to question this government's promises on Afghanistan. For over a year, the Conservatives repeatedly denied being pressured to extend our military mission by the United States. Yet we now know the Americans made a formal request for Canada to extend the mission in 2009. Instead of saying no, this government just asked them to have patience. Mr. Speaker, how can we trust a Prime Minister who says one thing to Canadians and another to the American government?
The Honourable Minister of National Defence.
Speaker, as the member from St. John's knows full well, we have been open and transparent about Canada's involvement in the mission in Afghanistan. We've debated this issue a number of times here in the House of Commons. We, of course, take his questions on a regular basis, and I look forward to doing so in the coming session of Parliament.
The Honourable Member for Burnaby, New Westminster.
Mr. Speaker, $35 billion was spent on the shipbuilding strategy that should be able to create jobs across the country. However, there are shipbuilding areas where people are worried because there are not enough shipbuilding sectors that will be able to share the money. Can the government confirm that Canadian shipbuilding areas will be the only beneficiaries of this shipbuilding strategy? The Honourable Minister of Public Works.
The government made the historic decision to build the ships that our Navy and Coast Guard needed right here in Canada. What that means is more than 75 million man-hours of work for the shipbuilding industry and for the manufacturing sector over the coming decades. So this is a competitive, open, transparent process between several shipyards, but at the end of the day, 2 shipyards will be chosen to do a great deal of work on behalf of the shipbuilding industry, but there will be shipyards and manufacturing sectors all across this country that will benefit from those jobs.
The Honourable Member for Burnaby, New Westminster.
Mr. Speaker, that's just the problem. The government says trust us on jobs, trust us on this file, but the reality is they've been playing politics with this issue. With this much money and jobs on the line, Canadians must see that there is a smart overall strategy that puts forward the strengths of each of our shipbuilding regions, in BC, in Ontario, in Quebec, and in Atlantic Canada. Will this government stop the political games and look to use the strength of every shipbuilding region of our country in these contracts, so all Canadians can benefit from this strategy?
The Honourable Minister of Public Works.
Mr. Speaker, as the member well knows, the process that is underway is at arm's length from the government through what is called the Shipbuilding Secretariat. We've created an open, fair, and transparent and very competitive process. This process includes not only independent oversight provided by KPMG, but also a fairness monitor and an international third-party marine expert that's evaluating these bids to ensure the fairness, openness, and the transparency of the process. At the end of the day, Mr. Speaker, this is a very competitive process, but again, this will create 75 million man-hours of work across this country.
Well done. The Honourable Member for New Brunswick Southwest.
Mr. Speaker, Today is Tax Freedom Day, the day Canadians start working for themselves after paying off all the taxes they owe to all levels of government. Unlike the tax and spend opposition, we don't believe Canadian families should pay high taxes. That's why since 2006, our government has reduced the overall federal tax burden to its lowest level in 50 years. In the next phase of Canada's Economic Action Plan, we'll build on that record. Can the Minister of State for Finance please inform the House how much earlier Tax Freedom Day is today compared to before where it was when we formed government?
The Honourable Minister of State for Finance.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'd like to congratulate the new member from New Brunswick Southwest. And he, of course, understands quite a bit about taxes, Mr. Speaker. That's why we're actually celebrating today the fact that Tax Freedom Day is 20 days sooner. 20 days sooner than in 2005, Mr. Speaker. And I think we all know why that is. Because we've reduced over 120 different taxes. We've reduced the GST from 7 to 6 to 5. I could go on the reasons that we're 20 days.
The Honourable Member for Hull-Aylmer. Mr. Speaker, the Conservative government continues to sow doubt among federal government employees. The threat of blind cuts is already looming over the entire federal capital region. But we've learned today that the government has already increased by 100% its use of temporary and vulnerable workers. Mr. Speaker, why does the Conservative government prefer to use cheap labour instead of paying its government officials appropriately?
To this place, and also thank the electors of Parry Sound, Muskoka, for allowing me to be in this place on their behalf. Of course, Mr. Speaker, the issues that the honourable member refers to involve merely 1% of total payroll expenditures, Mr. Speaker. Of course, we use temporary help when it is crucial to ensuring the delivery of services to all Canadians that are needed to meet unexpected circumstances, fluctuations in workload, special expertise. Those are the things that help us deliver these services to Canadians, and that's why we're proud to do it, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Hull-Aylmer. Mr. Speaker, in an article published today in Le Droit, we also learned that temporary workers are paid half of the value of the job. More and more, the Conservative government is gutting the public service of its lifeblood and therefore weakening the economic sector of our region. Mr. Speaker, is that in the spirit of the government? Does it want to encourage casual work and cheap labour? The Honourable President of the Treasury Board. Mr. Speaker, the budget indicates that the annual priorities of our government in terms of budgetary planning and the assignment of resources for the fiscal year includes specifications on budget spending of over $1,000 billion.
Prudent way, spending on things that Canadians care about. That was our mandate, and we're going through with it, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Halifax.
Mr. Speaker, Canada has won another Lemon Prize for the environment. Canada was the last country to submit its GHG data to the UN. Canada's delay in complying with Kyoto obligations is another Conservative failure in the area of the environment. Even Japan, after the terrible tsunami, met expectations. Why has the government failed to submit its data on time? The Honourable Environment Minister.
Let me first congratulate my colleague on her appointment to the Environment File. And rising for the first time in this House, I'd like to thank the voters of Thornhill for returning. The Government of Canada has always fully and fastidiously complied with the reporting requirements of the Kyoto Treaty. There was a 15-day grace period allowed at the end of the deadline, which occurred during the election, and we have filed those details.
Well done. The honourable member for Halifax.
Well, Mr. Speaker, it turns out that not only were we late reporting our data this year, but the government also decided to quietly remove data on tar sands emissions. And no wonder, because the data showed a 20% increase in tar sands emissions in 2009 alone. That's more than every single car in Canada, Mr. Speaker. Will the minister tell us who made the decision to try and hide this information on oil sands production?
If I could offer a first correction to my honourable colleague, we refer to the wealth abundance in northern Alberta as oil sands. And with regards to the question, in 2008, in our reporting of the 2008 emissions, the department attempted to offer sectorial numbers. It didn't work, and they were not.
The honourable member for Etobicoke North.
Mr. Speaker, climate change was not mentioned even once in the throne speech. Now the Conference Board gives Canada a failing grade for climate policies. These plans are so disorganized and inefficient that Canada will not meet its 2020 target. After 5 years of ignoring climate change, will the Conservatives commit to a national plan that addresses the very real challenges?
The Honourable Minister of the Environment.
Again, Mr. Speaker, let me congratulate my honourable colleague on her appointment to the Environment file. We do have a plan. That plan, Mr. Speaker, is working. We have committed to reduce greenhouse gas emissions sector by sector, and that plan is working. And with regards to the speech from the throne, I think my colleague was somewhat literal in her explanation, in her expectations. We reiterated our commitment to reduce climate change emissions across.
The honourable member for Etobicoke North.
Mr. Speaker, Environment Canada released its 2011 climate change plan to the United Nations. The plan shows that actions taken by this Conservative government are projected to reduce emissions by only 1/4 of what is needed to meet the 2020 target. Does this government have a plan to address the other 3/4 beyond deliberately fudging a progress report to the UN?
The Honourable Minister of the Environment.
Well, the short answer to that question, Mr. Speaker, is yes, we have a plan, and I would advise my colleague to familiarise herself with it. She and all Canadians can visit the Environment Canada website to see how we began last year with the major emitting sector, transportation. We are about to address new regulations for coal-fired electricity generation, and we will continue to work our way around the emitting sectors to meet our 2020 target.
The honourable member for Saint-Hyacinthe-Bagotte. Mr. Speaker, the federal government's gradual withdrawal from social housing and homelessness could lead to a dramatic increase in rent for hundreds of thousands of low-income renters, in addition to leaving many more out on the street. Mr. Speaker, whether it's through the Homelessness Partnership Initiative or other support programs for social housing, stakeholders at all levels are calling on the federal government to do its share. Will the government help correct this situation? The Honourable Minister of Human Resources. I'd like to welcome the new member and wish her good luck.
Of Haldeman, Norfolk, for once again placing their trust in me. Mr. Speaker, during our economic action plan, we had made tremendous investments in social and affordable housing. Some 26,000 projects are underway right across this country. Unfortunately, the Honourable Member's party didn't support those initiatives that are helping so many people who are vulnerable.
The Honourable Member for Davenport.
Mr. Speaker, they're fine words, but they're just not good enough. Instead of working to fix the problem, Conservatives actually cut housing programs. Last year, thousands of Ontario families couldn't afford a decent roof over their heads. And almost 70,000 of those families live in Toronto. Make no mistake, this is a national crisis. And seniors bear the biggest burden. Mr. Speaker, when will this government open its eyes and address this issue? We need a national housing strategy.
We do believe that having a roof over their head is one of the hallmarks to help people get out of poverty, get into the workforce, live a self-sustaining life. That's good for them, it's good for the country. That's why we've invested record amounts of money in affordable and social housing. Through our economic action plan, we supported the renovation, construction of some 26,000 units right across this country. Had it been up to the NDP, Mr. Speaker, 26,000 families would not have received our help this way.
Honourable member for Kelowna Lake Country.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Our government is committed to protecting and strengthening the long-term financial security of hard-working Canadians. Free trade creates jobs and economic opportunities, and that's why we've made it a priority to open new markets for Canadian businesses. Can the Minister for International Trade please tell us why we are pursuing these agreements? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Minister of International Trade.
For his question. Also congratulate him on being re-elected for a third time by the good residents of Kelowna Lake Country. And he knows, as does our government, how important international trade is to growing our economy, to creating jobs, to ensuring our long-term prosperity. Mr. Speaker, closing the doors to the world is not an option for us. Canadians know this is a kitchen table issue and how important free trade is to our country.
Charlottetown.
Mr. Speaker, Fabien Melançon, a 15-year Canadian veteran who served twice overseas, has started a hunger strike in front of the Department of Veterans Affairs in my riding of Charlottetown. He suffers from post-traumatic stress disorder. Mr. Melançon has tried to have government take ownership of the trouble created when a clerical error caused a lapse in his benefits. Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Minister of Veterans Affairs. What is government going to do to ensure that this veteran gets the compassionate treatment he so rightly deserved?
Honorable Ministre des Affaires des Anciens Combattants.
Mr. Speaker, I want to thank the member for his question and congratulate him for his recent appointment. As the member is aware, under the Privacy Act, I cannot discuss the specific details of this individual case. But I was given a mandate by the people of Lévis-Bellechasse, and today, as a Minister of Veteran Affairs, I commit myself to better the lives of our veterans, and I count on the support of all this House, this being starting today. What took place many years ago was unfortunate and an unacceptable mistake. Corrective measures were taken, and I instructed my officials to follow up on this veteran's case.
Order. Order. The Honourable Member for Hamilton Mountain.
Last Thursday, the Justice Department sent a threatening letter to USW Local 1005 ordering the steelworkers to cease their information pickets on the Burlington Lift Bridge. But these workers are simply doing what the federal government is refusing to do, trying to stop U.S. Steel from taking profits from its Hamilton operations until the federal government's court case against the company is resolved. Instead of getting tough on Canadian workers, when will this government get tough on foreign companies that break Canadian laws, undermine Canadian jobs, and attack Canadian pensions?
election in the same area that I come from, and thank the residents of Halton for returning me to this House. Mr. Speaker, as members opposite knows, this matters of one of provincial regulation. However, we are monitoring the situation as we would, and I speak to the Minister of Labour in Ontario on the matter almost on a monthly basis to ensure that we can keep track of what's going on there, and I thank the member for the question.
The Honourable Member for Niagara West Glenbrook.
Mr. Speaker, last week the Governor-General highlighted our government is here for all Canadians.
You betcha.
I'd like to ask the new Minister of State for Small Business what steps this government plans to take to reduce red tape so Canadian small businesses can focus their attention on growing their businesses and creating jobs.
Great question.
Honourable Minister of State for Small Business.
Mr. Speaker, as you know, jobs and growth will remain our government's top priorities. These are Canadians' priorities. The government has designated 2011 the Year of the Entrepreneur in Canada in order to raise public awareness of the important role played by small businesses in wealth creation. We need to reduce the burden on companies, and that's what we're going to be doing with the Red Tape Reduction Commission.
Mr. Speaker, Diamond Aircraft had a solid order for 240 jets worth $400 million, private sector funding, and a loan guarantee from the Ontario government. All that was needed to secure hundreds of jobs and a place for Canada in the modern aerospace industry was a commitment from the federal government. That commitment was denied. A major blow to job creation and London families that depended on those jobs. Mr. Speaker, can the Minister explain to the people of London why Diamond Aircraft was refused funding?
The Honourable Minister of State.
I would like to congratulate the member for her re-election and thank the people of Cambridge North Dumfries for re-electing me to this great House. The Government of Canada has already invested some $20 million into this company through the Strategic Aerospace and Defence Initiatives. However, as stewards of taxpayers' dollars, it would not be judicious to increase that amount by another $35 million. After a thorough review of Diamond's request, the company was advised by this government that we could not support the request. The company has other alternatives that they are exploring. We wish them well.
Honourable Member for Haute-Gaspésie, Matane-Matapédia. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister has gone to the Montérégie today, over a month after the flooding began. He did an aerial survey, but he's not meeting the needs of residents. As one mayor said, I'm not sure the Prime Minister understands the situation we've been going through here. The victims of the flooding deserve no less than victims in Manitoba and Alberta, but the Prime Minister stubbornly refuses to change the Army's mandate. What the victims are asking for is simple. Can the Army help with the cleanup? Will the Prime Minister listen to reason? The Honourable Minister of National Defence. Mr. Speaker, Canadian forces will remain in this area, in the emergency area, to help civilian authorities up until their specific expertise is no longer needed.
Back attended the flood-ravaged area, as did the Minister of Veterans Affairs, myself. Our thoughts are certainly with the people of the region, and we'll continue to work with them as members of the Canadian Forces continue to go about their important work there.
Canadian Forces Day is an opportunity for Canadians across the country to recognize the sacrifices that our men and women in uniform make on our behalf.
I'm very pleased to announce to members the presence in the gallery of 11 members of the Canadian Forces who are participating today in Canadian Forces Day.
tabling of documents, dépôt des documents. The Honourable Minister of Foreign Affairs.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, pursuant to Section 7 of the Special Economic Measures Act, I have the honour to table in both official languages copies of the Special Economic Measures Syria Regulations and the Special Economic Syria Permit Authorization Order formally announced on May 24, 2011 by the Prime Minister.
Tabling of documents, the Honourable Minister of Agriculture.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Pursuant to Standing Order 32.2, I have the honour to present to this House in both official languages a document from the Canadian Food Inspection Agency that indicates at the end of fiscal year 2010-11, CFIA inspection staff had increased by a net total of 733 members since this government was formed in 2006. That's an 18% increase, Mr. Speaker, something to be celebrated. Bravo!
Tabling of documents, dépôt des documents. Introduction of government bills. Statements by ministers. Rapport des